The American is a new man who acts upon new principles. He must therefore entertain new ideas and form new opinions. From involuntary idleness, servile dependence, and useless labor, he has passed to toils of a very different nature, rewarded by ample subsistence. This is an American. Quote by American farmer Crevecoeur. This quote exemplifies Americans in the 1760s and the new kind of society and culture that evolved, being distinct from any other in the past. Now I welcome you because we will talk about today the colonial society in the 18th century. One of the key distinctions in this era is population growth, and it is caused by mass immigrations and high birth rates among colonial families. As the American dream became imminent and thousands of European settlers fled their homelands to escape religious persecution and war, European groups such as the English, Germans, and Scotch-Irish comprise a small percentage of the nation's population. The abundance of fertile American land and a dependable food supply attracted many of these European groups. African Americans comprised 20% of the colonial powers, while the majority of blacks lived in southern colonies, present-day South Carolina and Georgia. As a little same kind, different time, this can relate to the new migration in the 1980s when people wanted to experience the American dream, so they started to move towards the United States to get better economic opportunities. Due to population increase, new ideas and culture formed. These different things led to the distinct patterns of life and the structure of colonial society. For example, self-government and religious toleration became popular among the colonies because there were so many people with different backgrounds shaping the government and social policies of society. As the economy expanded, people began to value family by marrying at young ages and having large families. This was quite beneficial since 90% of the population lived on farms, and large families allowed the little chores to be done easier. Little more work around the house. Men acquired the dominant position in society by having unlimited power in the household and being allowed to own land, and also being granted the right to beat their own wives. Isn't that crazy? Women were subjected to the domestic lifestyle as seen through history by bearing many children, the average being 8 children during the time, and performing a wide range of household tasks, including cooking, cleaning, and providing medical care. I have to say, I'm truly sorry, women. During the 1760s, America's economy was under the guidance of Britain. The British government was very strict, only permitting limited kinds of colonial manufacturing, such as making flour or rum. And this can be a counter-argument towards the non-importation agreements, which were created to allow Americans to have that feeling of independence and step away from British control. Because in this system, Americans were allowed to produce their own products to sell amongst themselves instead of getting products from Britain. However, the quickest route to wealth was through the land, of course. That's why so many people wanted to obtain their own land, because that was the symbol of wealth during the time. Many of the colonies had very different approaches to their economic statuses. For example, the New England colonies were primarily based on logging, shipbuilding, fishing, trading, and rum distilling. And most of the Puritan societies were in those locations. The middle colonies had rich soil and this produced an abundance of wheat and corn for export to Europe and the West Indies. It also allowed for a lot of trading to occur between the nations. The southern colonies, because of its diverse geography and climate, agriculture was very big, and also this was the location where slave labor took place. The products were mainly tobacco in the Chesapeake and North Carolina colonies, timber in the Carolinas, and rice and indigo in South Carolina and Georgia. The growing colonies were forced to use much of the limited hard currency, being gold and silver at the time, to pay for the imports from Britain and increasingly exceeded colonial exports. As far as transportation goes, this was just allowed for efficient access to goods and allowed for the faster transportation between one place to another. The primary transportation centers were Boston, New York, Philadelphia, and Charleston, and they were located on the sites of good harbors and navigable rivers. Religion. Protestants who dominated the colonies faced many problems, and Protestants actually composed the majority of America during the time as far as religion goes. However, Jews, Catholics, and Quakers suffered from the most serious discrimination and even persecution. So it's kind of ironic that even the foreigners were targeted too. So the things that they were trying to escape in their homelands, they end up facing it back in America. So that American dream is a little obscure if you ask me. There was no Church of England bishop in America to ordain ministers, and the absence of such leadership hampered the church's development. So that right there kind of suggests how America was dependent on Britain for survival in that way. It's kind of like this paternalist effect, how America is like a child still relying on England, still in a way a developing nation during that time. In the 17th century, most colonial governments taxed the people to support one particular Protestant denomination. Churches financed through the government are known as established churches. The Great Awakening, also known as the religious revival, in which much religion and culture, primarily influenced by the different peoples, since it was so many different ideas flowing that allowed people to question ideas about God and have new ideas relating to religion. In the first decades of the 18th century, sermons in Protestant churches tended to be long, intellectual discourses and portrayed God as a benign creator of a perfectly ordered universe. Doesn't that sound great? Influential leaders include Jonathan Edwards, who argued that God was rightfully angry with human sinfulness. Each individual who expresses deep penitence could be saved by God's grace, but the souls who paid no heed to God's commandments will suffer eternal damnation. In other words, if you don't follow God, you're destined for eternal suffering. That's the light way of saying it, I guess. And also George Whitefield. He mostly influenced the New England colonies. He believed that God was all-powerful and would save only those who openly professed belief in Jesus Christ. But since you had all these different people that believe in different things, that idea wasn't really accepted. However, the religions during this time really impacted many people's lives. Sinners became tearfully confessed in their guilt, and they joyously exulted in being saved. Emotionalism became a common part of Protestant services. The Great Awakening also caused divisions within churches, such as the division between the Congregational Church and the Presbyterian Church. However, the Great Awakening influenced the colonists, and regardless of their national origins or social class, the colonists were allowed to share a common experience in the whole American experience. The Great Awakening actually marks the early beginnings of a united national culture for America. How's that for American pride? This concludes my section, and I will further discuss the multiple choice questions. Page 59, number 10. We will discuss this in class. Thank you for listening.